Well, hey, good morning this morning. I know this isn't our normal setup, but this morning we'll make it work, and hopefully we'll be back to normal pretty soon. But it's this morning I titled this morning's sermon "Having Peace in a Chaotic World." How to have peace when times are uncertain, when times seem that they are just chaotic. Well, it's like this morning I'll be reading from the book of Philippians, chapter 4. And so if you have your Bibles, you can join me at the Philippians chapter 4. And I'm going to be briefly reading verses 8 and verse 9. That's in the book of Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and then verse 9. This is the Apostle Paul, and he's writing to the church of Philippi. It's like Paul says, "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy," Paul says to meditate on these things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me. Paul says these things do these things. And he says that the God of peace will be with you. It should be of no surprise to hear me say this morning that this world is pretty chaotic right now. Our world is pretty crazy. I mean, think about it. We are having church via the internet right now. I am recording this live from my basement of all places. So it's pretty safe to say that things are pretty crazy right now. Things are pretty chaotic. It's like we are using words now such as coronavirus. We are talking about being quarantined. We're talking about social distancing. We are all learning what that word means, social distancing. We are hearing about testing kits on the news. All of our schools are on lockdown. All the businesses seem like they are on lockdown. Drive-through restaurants have become the new normal. But even the sports world is on lockdown. We see basketball, baseball, football, racing, hockey. All of these have been put on hold. Everything seems to be on lockdown right now. And if that's not enough, this is also an election year. And election years can be stressful enough as it is. It's like we see also that the stock market is down. We see a lot of people are starting to panic because they feel like they're losing all of their life savings, which is actually true in some people's cases. It's like we see that there's always seems like there's some kind of rumor of a war going on in some other country. We see on the news where North Korea is shooting off missiles into the sea. It's like we see that religious persecution is on the rise. It is on the rise across this world, but it's also on the rise within our own nation itself, even within our own state. It's like we see that divorce rates are up. We read that suicide rates are up. I mean, it's no wonder in our world today that the depression, it's like anxiety is at an all-time high. It seems like it is so rampant this morning. It is so rampant within our society today. And it's like it seems like to today's times, there are so many things that can get us amped up. There are so many things that can bring us down. There are so many things that can give us anxiety right now. And it's like the truth is this morning that if you don't have anxiety, all you have to do is watch the news. Watch the news for 5 minutes. It's like you'll be sure to turn the TV off with a huge case of anxiety. But it's pretty safe to say, it's pretty safe for us to say this morning that our world is pretty chaotic right now. Our world can even seem like it is falling apart. Sometimes it can even seem like our world is falling apart at the seams. But I'm here to tell you this morning, this here's just a side note, but I'm here to tell you that this world is not falling apart. I truly believe that this world is falling into place. This world isn't falling apart. Our world is simply falling into place. Now, it's back at the beginning of the year, you heard me say that I was going to teach on some prophecy this year, that I would like for us to go through some of the book of Revelation this year. Well, it's when we ever get back to the building, and it's like we get back to some sense of normalcy. It's like I still want to do that. And that's where that comment will come into play. That's where that statement of our world is not falling apart. Our world is simply falling into place. We will see that played out once we get to study some prophecy this year. So that's something to look forward to. That's something to give you some excitement this morning. But it's like I've been studying a lot on prophecy the last several months, and it's with all this lockdown and with all this quarantine stuff, and it's really given me a lot of time to catch up on some of my readings. So like be on the lookout in the future for that. But it's truthfully, we all know, it's no secret that our world is pretty chaotic right now. We are all sitting at home watching church via the internet this morning. I mean, we all know that it seems like the whole world is going nuts right now. There's no need in denying that. There's no need in us pretending that it's not going on. There's no need in us faking that it's not really happening. It is happening. We can't deny that. So the real question is this morning, and the real question that I want us to talk about this morning is, how do we live in a chaotic, crazy world? And it's even more than that. How can we have peace in this crazy, chaotic world? How can we have peace in uncertain times? How can we have peace when it seems like this whole world is falling apart? Now, it's the Apostle Paul he actually gives us the answer back in the verses that we just read from the book of Philippians. He told the Philippian church how to have peace in uncertain times. He is teaching them how they can have peace in a chaotic world. He tells this church how they can have peace. Now, it's before we talk about how we can have peace, I think it's important for us to understand a little bit about Paul, sort of understand a little bit about the times that he's writing this letter in. See, because Paul knew a little something about living in chaotic times. Paul knew what it was like to live in uncertain times. He knew what it was like to live in crazy times. Because see, the days of Paul, back in the first century church, these days were much like our days today. These days were nuts. These days were crazy. These days were uncertain. Well, it's like in some aspects, these days, the days of Paul may have even been more crazy than the days that we're living today. See, because back when Paul wrote the book of Philippians, and it's just to get a little understanding, this book is actually a letter that he wrote to this church. This is a personal letter. This is Paul's heart that he is writing to this church, and this letter was later turned into a book. But Paul wrote this letter. This letter was written only about 30 years after the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ. It's like, what happened to Jesus during his earthly ministry? Jesus was put to death. He was crucified for, that's for speaking about salvation, for speaking about grace. He was put on the cross and he was crucified. We'll be celebrating that in a few weeks with Easter. I mean, I hope we're all back together as normal then. But it's Christ was crucified. Now, like, thankfully, he was resurrected. It's like, and because of his resurrection, we now get to have eternal life through him. But these were the days Paul was living in. Paul wrote this letter. He wrote this book only about 30 years after the life of Christ. That's like back in these times, back when this letter was written, we know that the Roman Empire ruled the world at this time, and the Roman Empire was evil. They ruled with an iron fist. They were not moral people. They were feeding people to lions in the Colosseum. They were conquering other countries. They were murdering. They were doing all this crazy stuff. They were crucifying people on crosses. They actually hung people on crosses as a form of punishment. I mean, that's just crazy. Even for us today, that seems crazy and nuts. So this was the world that Paul was living in. He was living under Roman rule. He was living in a time where they put people in jail just for preaching. They were hanging people on crosses. And Paul actually is writing this letter. He wrote the book of Philippians from a Roman prison cell. He wrote this letter while sitting in jail, while sitting in prison. So that's the world that Paul lived in. Now, just another side note, the life expectancy back in the first century church, that's like if you study the life expectancy of the days of Jesus or the days of Paul, you will see that the average life expectancy of that time was only about 30 years of age. People in the first century, they didn't even name their babies until they were like a month old, because that statistic shows that baby was probably never going to make it to a month old. See, because the disease was rampant in these days. People died young. They didn't live long. So it's like, so for Paul to be an old man sitting in prison writing this letter, that was actually an odd thing. It was unusual for a person to grow old in these days because of the disease. So we think coronavirus is so bad, which it is. There's people dying every day from it. But the life expectancy in the days of Paul was only around 30 years old. So with that said, it's pretty safe for us to take Paul's advice to heart. Paul knew about uncertainty. He knew about living in a chaotic world. He knew what it was like to not know if you was going to have food tomorrow, or if you was going to be put in jail tomorrow, or if you was going to catch some crazy disease like leprosy and be set outside of the city just to waste away and die. So that's a background of the days that Paul lived in. But here's the neat thing for us this morning. But that's in spite of all this chaos, all this uncertainty, and in spite of the fact that he was sitting in a prison cell when he wrote this letter, Paul writes to us about having peace. Paul tells us that we can have peace even in uncertain times. We can have peace even when everything outside seems like it is chaotic, it's nuts, and it seems like the world is falling apart. Now just think about that for a second. Paul, a man sitting in prison, is teaching us today about peace. He is telling this church that he wrote this letter to how to have peace. Think about it. He's sitting in a prison cell talking about how to have peace. Now, I don't know about you, but if a man is sitting in jail, if he is sitting in prison, and he is telling me that he has found the success, or he has found the key to having peace, he has found the secret to having peace, I don't know about you, but I think I would want to listen to what he has to say. I would want to find out what he's tapped into. I would want to find out what the secret is. So like finally, here's the answer to our question this morning. How can we have peace? How can we have peace when times seem to be uncertain, when times seem to be chaotic, when it seems like the world is falling apart. So, like, here it goes. Here's the answer to this morning's big, tough question. Paul says in these verses, Paul says that the secret to having peace in uncertain times, Paul says that it lies within our own minds. Paul says that it lies within our thoughts. Peace comes from, Paul says that true peace comes from what we focus on, what we choose to place our focus on, what we choose to place our thoughts on. Now, Paul, in these verses, Paul uses the word meditate. Paul says to meditate on these things. It's like the word meditate simply means to ponder something. It means to consider something. It means to place value on something. So Paul is saying in verses 8 and 9, Paul's saying we need to be careful about what we meditate on. He says we need to be careful about what we place our focus on, what we are allowing into our thought process. Because see, the truth is that if you only focus on negative things, if you only focus on the negative, that's it, then only negative is going to come out. That's like negative in, negative out. That's like positive in, positive out. That's what Paul was saying here. Now, I know that seems like something you would hear in a doctor's office, something you would hear in a psychiatrist's office, which it is that's 100% true. It is something that you would hear in that setting. But I'm here to tell you this morning that that's not something new. That is actually biblical. That concept comes from the Bible. That isn't just psychiatrist talk. That is actually sound biblical advice of negative in, negative out, positive in, positive out. And that's what Paul was telling this church this morning. So Paul actually gives us 6 things in these verses, as he gives us 6 things that we should be meditating on. Paul says we should be meditating on these 6 things. And it's like for some reason you aren't going to find having 3 years worth of toilet paper supply on this list. I don't know how that didn't make the list, but as Paul does give us a list of six simple things that like we can focus on, just 6 daily things we can put into our thought process, what we can put into our thought life to help us have peace. Now, like, I don't have time this morning to dig real deep into all 6 of these and to dive into all 6 of these. But it's nonetheless, we are going to quickly mention these 6 things, and we are going to get through them this morning. But in verse 8, Paul gives us these 6 things. It's like Paul says that we are to meditate. Firstly, we are to meditate on things which are true. Basically, Paul is saying, don't let yourself fall for lies. Paul is saying, please know what is true. And it's like, hold tight to the truth. And it's like, if you want to know what truth is, if you want to know what things that are true is, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. People, Jesus is truth. The teachings of Jesus is true. Hold tight to things that are true. Paul goes on to say, focus on things which are noble. Now, the word noble here, he isn't talking about focusing on kings and queens and it's like following all that. But we see that the word noble in this verse is referring to things that are of high moral principle. So he's saying to keep our minds focused on things that really are of high principles, things that are of high moral principle. Paul goes on to say that we are to meditate on things which are just, or that there means to meditate on things that are morally right and fair. Paul's saying well, to meditate on justice. He's saying well, to keep in mind things that are right, keep in mind things that are fair. Paul goes on to say to meditate on things that are pure. That's like something that is pure. That there means that it is genuine, it is true, that something that is pure has no contamination, something that is pure. Paul says to meditate on things which are lovely, which things that are lovely, that's that you can also use the word beautiful. We can focus on a sunrise, we can focus on a sunset, we can focus on uplifting music, whatever it is, but like just try to focus on something that is lovely, something that is beautiful. And that's it. Lastly, Paul says that we are to meditate on things which are of good report. And it's like something that is of good report means that it stands for dignity, it stands for honor, and it stands for respect. That if you hear that a person is of good report, that means that person is of good character, he's of good morals, that you can't find any fault in him. So then we say that person is of good report, or that thing is of good report. And that's what Paul was saying here. He says to focus on things that are of good report. Focus on things of honor. Focus on things of respect. Now, Paul also sneaks in a sneaky seventh little principle that is easy to miss and it's easy to overlook. And it's like, truthfully, even I would have overlooked this, that if I didn't come across it in some of my readings this past week. I've actually found this in like one of my commentary books while I was studying these verses, but it's easy to overlook and it's easy to miss this sneaky little seventh principle, and it actually might just be the most powerful of these six, maybe now, that's it now, 7 key principles. But like Paul says in verse 9, Paul says, all of those things that you heard me teach, all of those things that you saw me do, Paul says, do these things. Do the things that you saw me do. Do the things that you heard me teach you about. See, essentially, what Paul is saying in verse 9 is, Paul is telling us, he's telling his church to be careful who you listen to. Be careful who and where you get your information from. Be careful of who has the ability to influence your thoughts. Paul's saying all the things that you heard me say, all the things you saw me do these things, because the things that I taught you, the things that you saw me do came from Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is what I base my life off of. That's what Paul is saying here. Paul is saying, be careful who you get your information from. Be careful what you are allowing to influence your thoughts. Paul is saying to let the teachings of Jesus be what fills your mind in these uncertain times. Let his peace come upon you. It's like, church, the same thing holds true for us today. We can have peace. We can have assurance, and we can still have hope even today in these crazy, uncertain times where a lot of people are being quarantined. There's a lot of people being locked down. There's a lot of people who aren't able to go to work, but we can still have peace even in these crazy times if we keep our focus on these 6. Actually, we now know that there is 7 principles. If we just keep our focus on these 7 principles, Paul says that we can still have peace. Paul says to focus on truth. Focus on things that are noble. Focus on things that are just, pure, lovely, and of good report. And it's like, be careful of what you're allowing, what it influence you. Be careful of what you're allowing into your thought life. But that's like remember earlier that I said negative in, negative out, positive in, positive out. Be real careful. That's about what you're allowing into your thoughts. That's like, so in closing, I just want everybody to know that it's like, even when this world seems like it is being crazy, this world is off the chain, and it seems like this world is falling apart, I just want you to be just be assured this morning. You can have confidence in the fact that God is still in control. God is still sitting on his throne. God isn't shocked right now. God isn't surprised. We as humans, we as this earth, we didn't throw God a curveball that's a he didn't see coming. God is still in control. He's still on his throne. God still loves you. God still loves me. And we can have peace if we just seek him. Seek God. Seek his wisdom. Seek his counsel. Don't seek the wisdom of the news channels. Don't seek the wisdom of Facebook. Don't seek the wisdom of the media or our culture or society. Find peace. Find your assurance in God. Find your peace through his Son, Jesus Christ. So it's like, in closing, I just want you guys to know, church, all the people from Afton Chapel, and so anybody that is watching online this morning, I just want all y'all to know that I love you and I miss you, and I can't wait till we all get back together again so that we get to do this in person. It's like, I love you, and it's like, I'm praying for y'all, and if y'all need anything, please don't hesitate calling us or it's like sending us a message. We'll say goodbye for now.